So today I'm going to talk about top tips on how to pass your RICS APC. Sonia's done a very detailed introduction to who I am. I've been around in real estate for 30 years. I was told there's a lot of people who've joined from local government or from government backgrounds. And so I have a long history in local government as well. I served as Director of Asset Management, but also Head of Services. More and more now, I do more and more academic related work, and I support more and more candidates as a counsellor going forward for the RICS professional interview, applying for MRICS and also Associate RICS. So today, in terms of key learning outcomes, we'll talk about selecting your route. We'll talk about your pathway, which is part of the RICS process. We'll talk about how to understand the competencies. This has been designed for senior professional candidates. I am conscious that the missing link here is writing your summary of experiences, but most of the first batch of people I've actually mentored and counselled have actually been senior people, chief executives and directors. And more now I'm doing other candidates on other routes as well. So when this was first written, this was done on the basis of actually writing your case studies, because SPAs need to do 3. And then there's also comments around using AI tools like ChatGPT. There's also interview tips and challenges of the APC, and also points about success, and then any final thoughts on why the RICS. But basically, I'm the director of Surveyors Law Limited. I'm specialising more and more in providing counsellor and mentoring services for people going forward for their professional interview, but also for people submitting for the Associate RICS assessment. I have said we specialise in senior candidates, CEOs and directors, but more and more we are working with a more diverse pool of people. The next slide 4, it starts to talk about choosing your pathway. But actually, before you choose your pathway, the first step is actually selecting your route. So in terms of the route, as some people may know who've actually looked at the RICS information, you have a couple of routes, but the main ones are the APC route. There's also then the professional experience route. There's also the route which is around senior professional. There's also the specialist route, and working with a candidate yesterday, I also realised there is also the professional qualification route. So from my perspective, and in terms of the work I've been doing, I have been supporting people on all of those routes to MRICS. In addition to that, I've been working more and more with candidates applying through the Associate RICS route. But once you have selected your route, which is your first step, your next step is to choose your pathway, and also to have a counsellor on board, because no candidate can go forward without having a counsellor. But in terms of choosing your pathway, not everyone has a clear pathway at the start, and that's okay. And one of the pieces of work I do, even during the first half-hour session I do with candidates, which is a free call just to kind of have a conversation about where candidates are. Not everyone has a clear pathway, and that's okay. A lot of the day-to-day work crosses over multiple pathways, and the work I tend to do with candidates is to work with them to actually see which of the 23 pathways begin to best fit them. And what can help is to read the competencies. So you need to read the competencies really carefully where you're not sure about pathway, and this clarifies what's expected in terms of each pathways. And yesterday, when I was doing a session with a candidate, what I was saying is actually page 7 in the candidate guides, and also the purple box, which is the core part, which is part of the competencies. Some candidates can take a while to decide, but that's okay. But with our help, I can work you through that. The key thing to think about is the type of work you do, the kind of case study you will be able to write, and what you enjoy learning. I worked with candidates in the past, and I had a first group of 4 people actually who went forward. I started doing this more and more full-time since November last year, and all of them were senior. There was one candidate in particular who was not sure about certain competencies and actually felt he was struggling a bit. But all he did do was he did batch training. So he signed up to a lot of the RICS training. He trained himself, and then when he went forward for the professional interview, he was very well prepared. But the point here is that you must enjoy learning. You must enjoy the APC process, because as well as it being a qualification to gain, it's also a process of developing yourself in terms of professional development. And it's also around thinking about developing skills for life. So moving on to the next slide, please. In terms of understanding the competencies, the point's been made before. Spend time with the pathway guides, read them carefully. You might choose competencies that overlap, and that's okay, but read them carefully to see what the competencies really require. And there's an example here around for sales, for example, sales and leasing. That can actually overlap in some form, but you've also then got landlord and tenant, and they can fit really well in terms of property management. So the key thing really is to read the competencies. If you have competencies which overlap, don't be put off with that. That's okay. The key thing is actually to really understand what the competency guide is asking you to do. And it's looking at actually what the key requirements are. So moving on to that, so pick competencies that make sense together and pick competencies that reflect your actual work. So think about that actually carefully, because one of the things that the professional interview does is that if you've not done the work and you've started to put things in about saying, well, I have done this or I've given advice in this, one of the things a professional interview will do is that it will tease out what you've actually done. So you may have done it on paper, but what the interview is actually doing is testing that you've really done it in the end. And so everything you put into your summary of experiences and in case studies should actually be real work that you've done. So the first part of it for candidates going forward on the APC route is writing your summary of experiences. In terms of writing your summary of experiences, you go through those step by step. When you go through those step by step, it makes you think about the competency from a knowledge and understanding perspective. It makes you think very carefully about related and relevant experiences. And it makes you think very carefully about where you've given level 3 advice. And level 3 advice is where you have relied on your practice and you've got to a position where you're able to give a client recommendations and you're able to give clients written reports, and you're almost moving into the expert position in terms of that competency. So that's what the SOE's done. But in terms of the SPA route, the route is slightly different, because actually with SPA, what the candidates on that route do is they write three case studies. They don't have to write the SOEs. The SPA route is slightly different, as you have to submit 3 case studies, and that slide reinforces that. For the APC, you would submit 1 longer case study and the summary of experiences. In terms of key advice, use a project that showcases the competencies, not just something that made money. Think about your interview when writing it. As I said, the interview's there to test that you've actually done the work. Do not exaggerate your role. Be honest about what you've done. You will be asked about this, as I said, at interview, and it will be obvious if you're not being honest. Include real challenges and how you dealt with them. It does not have to be perfect. And I often say to candidates working with me and buying into our services that actually this isn't about impressing. This is very much about doing and being realistic about what you've done, being realistic and honest about the information you have and your knowledge. And it's okay to just be okay in terms of being moderate. You don't have to be like looking at the most impressive case study. Make sure you read the RICS professional standards and practice information and refer to the mandatory competencies early on and reflect them. One of the disadvantages that I feel that SPA candidates have is that when they go through the SPA route, they don't necessarily do the reflection process that people on the APC process do when it comes to thinking about the competencies. But one of the things I do with the candidates I work with is to actually talk through the competencies very carefully with them, and also develop a reading and training plan for them so that when they are developing their case studies, they're actually thinking about what they should be writing about and aligning that with the industry requirement or the RSCS's requirement. Moving on to the next slide then. The other one I started to see more and more with some candidates is the use of tools like ChatGPT. One of the things I've started to discover, because I've started to use it more myself recently, is it's actually a great tool. Uh, it can be helpful just to kind of understand a concept in terms of being able to research things really quickly. But one of the things I have discovered is actually if you're relying on the information, you have to ask where it's got the information from. And you've actually got to interrogate what it's telling you. Because actually, as you become more and more informed, what you start to realize is that the information isn't always correct. And if the information isn't always correct and you're using that to provide services, you're putting yourself into a position which is compromising. So what I always suggest is use it as a light touch in terms of beginning to understand things. It can help in terms of basic research, but if you're relying it in terms of providing services and advice, but also for the RICS APC, you need to think very carefully about how you use it. One of the things the RICS recently has done is that they've issued guidance on the use of tools like AI. What it basically says is that if you are using tools like AI, particularly in terms of developing your services and advice, you need to declare that in the work you do. But this slide goes back to saying, but do not rely on it to write your case study. But in the case of the SOEs, AI cannot write your SOEs, and it really cannot write your case studies because actually it needs to be on the basis of what you've done. And unless you tell AI what you've done and you feed it into the system, it won't necessarily be able to put that together for you. So if it sounds like someone else wrote your work, it will be obvious at the interview. The key thing I look for in English, we often use S's, and that's the English language. If it's done by ChatGPT, you can see the Z's. And the Z's really stand out. And normally I look very carefully for those. But also I look very carefully where candidates have just put too much in. By putting too much in, what it actually means is that someone else potentially has written that. Putting too much in because a tool has written your information for you could actually lead you down a dangerous path because actually when it comes to the interview, if you start to get questioned on areas which you're not sure of, or because a tool's written it for you, you won't be in a good position because the assessors will pick that up at the final interview. So the point is use it for support, but do not use it as a shortcut. Be very careful about the information it provides you, and think very carefully about if you are going to use some of the information, whether if you were tested on it, you would be able to withstand that test. So moving on to the next slide, please. So in terms of interview tips and challenges of the APC, do not read your script, speak naturally if you can, but it is okay to have speaker notes, and the RICS does say that. It's the only script that you're allowed to really have. The rest of it then, when you go for the interview, they do expect you to know your case studies and your submission. They don't expect you to be reading from it. The next bit really is about be confident, speak slowly and speak clearly. Practice your timing. This is one of the key things in that it's okay to be slightly short of the 10 minutes, but make sure you're not over the 10 minutes. So practice in terms of your best case and your worst case version. Prepare for follow-up questions from your case study and also from your SOEs if you're on the APC route. And the panel wants to know how you think, not just what you memorize. So some of the challenges is really it's either a pass or refer. There's no partial credits. We often as assessors say actually if only we could give a bit of feedback for even people who pass, because actually what that would allow them to do to think about, it would allow them to think about where they've got areas where perhaps they have strengths, but also appreciate the areas where perhaps they could work on a slightly more. So in terms of a pass, when people do pass and you get your result, a pass is a pass. It doesn't really talk about someone's level in terms of their ability to pass. What it basically says is that they did enough to pass. But if they have been referred, you will get a full report in terms of what you need to do different next time. And it's not like a maths test where you can predict 70% will be enough. And the key thing is to give it everything. There is no second guessing. So you need to work hard on this. one of the things you need to do is you need to practice. One of the things I find really strange is I work with some really senior people, and when I actually say to them, "You've written your presentation, now can you do your presentation?" It really surprises me that even the senior people get really taken on that moment when they're asked to present all of a sudden. So usually we practice the presentation 3 or 4 times until we feel that they are confident and able to do the presentation without being flustered at the first request. So in terms of key points for success, break up studying, it gets boring. Do mix in videos, reading, practice, learning, and that's one of the things I do with candidates. I map the type of things which may work for individual candidates. There are different tools that people can use. These days, with the internet, people can be overwhelmed with the amount of information that's available. It's very different to like 3 decades ago, where all you had was the library. Now people can go in, put in a topic, and they can be overwhelmed. The key thing in information and studying is make sure the sources are good, make sure the information you have is good. But it does get boring. So it's really a case of mixing videos, do the reading and do the practice learning, but at the same time, break down your learning. Do bite-sized studying. Don't expect to do everything overnight. And try to apply what you learn in your day-to-day work. Get friends and colleagues to quiz you. I always recommend this. When I went forward for the APC, my son, he would take my flashcards and he would test me in terms of, Mum, can you answer this question? Became a family event. And actually, I always felt that if he went forward for the APC just after I did it for the professional interview, he would probably be okay in terms of answering the questions. But the key thing is to practice out loud. Saying things clearly does matter. And like I said, even rehearsing your answers verbally, not just in your head, can make a big difference because it allows people to start to talk about things out loud, because some of the things you will be tested with are not everyday ideas or concepts. One of the things I had the other day with a candidate was the term a phoenix firm. They have reasonably good command of English, and I just threw the question at them. They said, "I don't know what it is, but I can have a guess on what it might be." And they actually guessed it almost correct, because even I had to research what it was, but actually they were probably stronger in the way they answered it. So it is important to study, to research, but also to practice what you do, but even practice your presentation and your questions. So final thoughts, the key thing is to enjoy the process, even if you are referred, and sometimes the referral may not be a bad thing, because actually sometimes when you do get through and you get, for example, the RICS, it comes with a lot of responsibility, where candidates are just not ready for that responsibility or could do with a bit more development. The referral may actually be helpful. So don't think of the referral being bad. Think of it as an opportunity to get even better. When I was in local government, one of the things I started to do after passing was I used to encourage more and more candidates to come forward. And so we started doing like monthly, let's just get together and talk about the RICS process. And what I used to say to candidates is actually, if you're referred, don't worry about it. You just go back again and use it as an opportunity to learn. The key bit in all of this is remember, even if you're referred, you're learning. And the learning is really valuable. You will gain knowledge, you will use your career and develop further skills. And one of the things I had with one candidate, actually, he was a chief executive of a family office. And one of the things on that family office is that I asked him how he got to his role, and he goes, "Because I'm the family," almost. And I was like, "Well, no, you've been in that role for a long time. Why don't you just reflect on what you bring in terms of you as a person?" Because actually, having worked with them and having worked with other candidates, I actually found them to be a really impressive candidate. So they had a lot of things which were really positive, but they hadn't used that time ever to stop and reflect on actually what they contribute. And during the mentoring session, they were like, "I've just spent the morning telling my team how lucky they are to have me." And that was only because we were doing that reflective piece together. So, it is important to look at your career and to also think about developing further skills and use the process to do that. Give the process the respect it deserves and commit fully. I myself don't understand when people come forward and treat it as something that's light, because I also learned the hard way that it's not something that you can just do lightly. If your counselor isn't giving you time or doesn't have the availability, which I had, one of the things you need to do is try and see if you can source someone independent. Because if someone independent can give you proper advice, give you half an hour or give you an hour here, that would be better than you trying to just second guess things on your own. And the process is confusing for people. And remember, it's almost like a driving test that actually, in the end, if you try enough, most people can actually do this. So it's not something that's impossible to do. It's just making sure you do it with the right guidance and support.